We have arrived. This is Webb Parton, your host, and we welcome you to the Free Range Dogs podcast. This is a place where we stake out a shady spot and talk about all things dog. Find yourself a soft piece of grass, spin a few circles, plop down, rest your feet, and join us in this joyful conversation. We have Bret Wonnacott here with us, and really happy to have another setter guy, because I'm a setter guy. And as I often joke with my wife, when we refer to setters, we refer to them as the one true dog.
That's right.
And we often do that in front of people who own other bird dog breeds. And we use colorful names for those other bird dog breeds. But,
right. The dogs that are backing.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. The one true dog. So you've had setters a long time?
Yeah, more than 20 years. Okay. Since the 90s.
And because I've seen your dogs, we had them at a training, and they looked like similar blood to mine. Mine were, we had Llewellyn stock, Bondu dogs, and we'd outcrossed a Bozan Mosley, and then we were 6 generations in when we stopped.
Wow. And I saw some dogs that came out of your kennel, and they were nice dogs. Pretty good sized dogs, I think.
Could be, yeah. They'd run a range. Our females would be 60 pounds, 55 pounds. Yeah. Males get a little bit larger. Yeah. I miss setters. We no longer have setters.
Well, you need one.
Probably. It's a funny story. I had a dear friend from Kansas, and he had spent his life running bird dogs and judging bird dog trials and retriever trials. And he hit a certain age where he just couldn't follow setters anymore.
Yeah.
And so he told me, he confided in me that it was time, and he got a German Shorthair Pointer, and he referred to it as his old man dog. And that was a dog that didn't have the range and the stuff that he needed to worry about. And don't want to admit it, but I have an old man dog sitting at home now, and a German Shorthair Pointer and a lab. Yeah. So I have dear memories of running setters, and they are such a unique temperament, a soft dog, but not soft in terms of not bold, but soft in terms of very dear, almost effeminate kind of an affect.
Very much so. Yeah. A heavy-handed handler could really ruin a setter. Can
and have. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was a gun dog pro for a lot of years, training, and I didn't train trial dogs. I trained hunting dogs. Mm-hmm. So when something would go bad, and they couldn't fix it, they'd show up on the doorstep with 3 boxes of dog and say, "Can you put this back together?" Sure. And setters typically respond to kindness. Yeah. Yeah, they're very gentle, and they make great family dogs, great with kids, as a rule. And, our folks out there listening, we're talking to people with all kinds of breeds, with all kinds of interests.
Sure.
And so much of what we experience with our dogs is genetics, in the way that they respond to a thing and in their own drives. You have a herding dog. He's looking for something to herd. There was someone at a class the other night who lives in Park City and had a picture of their little cow dog herding a moose off the front yard.
Oh no!
So, that's the fallback, is those genetics. And so, I wanted to talk a little bit about what it's like living with a setter.
Yeah. So our dogs are they're out of Sunrise lines for the most part. Of course, that goes back to the great setter Toccoa Mountain Sunrise, and his offspring. And they are turbo dogs on the ground, super energetic. They run really hard, and at home they just kind of turn it off once they hit about 2.5 or 3 years old. Maybe when they're puppies, they're a little rambunctious, like all puppies. But at some point, they're happy to watch a football game with you and cuddle up. And you touched on something earlier with children. And that's part of the reason that I have setters. I don't have any children of my own, but I do a lot of youth activities. And I'm really comfortable taking my setters to a youth fair where they're surrounded by 500 children that want to hug them and squeeze them and scratch their ears, and they're very good in that situation. It's not too big for them. They don't show a lot of anxiety around that situation, where some of the other dogs I've had in the past have. And that's really, other than, I always tell people they please my eyes in the field, but you've got to live with them all year, right? So, because first and foremost, they are hunting dogs. And my wife loves them, which is really interesting, because when I met my wife, I had a Brittany at the time. And we were on probably our second or third date, and my wife, my phone rang. I had a new cell phone. It was really new at the time, right? One of the first ones. Anyways, the phone rang, and it was the breeder, a friend of mine, and he said, "Hey, your pup's been born." And I was like, I was excited, and I hung up, and she said, "Are you getting a puppy? It sounded like you're getting a puppy." And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Do you like dogs?" And she said, "Oh, I love dogs." She said, "What are you getting?" And I said, "An English setter." And she said, "A what?" And I said, "No, they're a hunting dog. They're beautiful." And the next time I saw her, she had looked it up online or who knows where. And she said, "Oh, that is such an ugly dog." And I was like, "Well, I think they're nice,
Knife to the heart.
Right. Yeah. Well, here we are, 20 something years later, and she's warmed up to the idea, and she has her own setter dog that she runs, and anyway, she loves the breed now, but she wasn't a fan right off the bat.
Well, I've watched different folks over the years, when I was training and running dogs, working dogs, and different people have their different things that that they focus on, that they want to do. And my thought always was that people who like to watch dogs point had English pointers, or now they're pointers, not English pointers.
Yeah.
And people who liked to control dogs and to work dogs, to manage dogs, would often go with versatile breeds like Shorthairs or such. But the people who liked to watch dogs run had English setters.
Yeah.
And to watch an English setter run through a field of grass is...
it's poetry in motion.
Yes. Yeah. You do your own training with the dogs?
Yeah. So I handle all my own dogs and do my own training. And ours are not only field dogs for hunting, but they're also trial dogs. We run in a trial called the National Shoot to Retrieve Association. And I do all my own training, which is, you get better with each dog. My first dogs weren't so good. I give a lot of advice these days as I'm getting older, and I always tell people, well, you're going to mess up your first one, but we just keep at it, right, and just keep learning. My favorite part is bringing puppies along and just watching that. So you mentioned earlier that herding dogs herd. Bloodhounds, they search, pointing dogs point, and a setter is a pointing dog. And people always ask me, well, how do you teach them to point? Well, that's interesting, because you don't teach them to point. It's an inherent trait. It's something that's been bred into them. And it's fascinating to watch a 10-week-old puppy, a 12-week-old puppy point. They just do it. And it's, every time I see it, and it just brings goosebumps, and as you watch that start to develop and that puppy start to realize his purpose in this world, and man, if we could love our jobs as much as these dogs love their jobs, we would never have a bad day. As they start to turn the corner, and you've watched this yourself, I'm sure, Webb, and as they go from that phase to a sort of uncertain phase where they're trying to learn every little thing, and then you get through that juvenile point. And you get to a part where it all just comes together, and this dog works with you, and he cues off of you, and you're working as a team in the field towards a common goal, and that's wonderful as a hunting dog. And then when you put it in the type of field trials that I run, and you're competing together as a team too, which is trials and hunting are two very different things. And to ask a dog to be a trial dog and a hunting dog, it's a pretty big deal. Not every dog can do it, and it takes a while for them to understand the difference. But working together with a dog as a team it's unbelievable. there's nothing I like better, and it's probably why I exist.
Well, I was a quail guide for many years.
Yes.
And, I'd live on the road. So pull a dog trailer and then have, depends on if I needed a big ice chest or not. I could either have 4 pet porters or 3 in the back, because
Right.
one might have had to be the fourth one might have had to be an ice chest.
Yeah.
You think about an ideal life.
Yeah.
And certainly there were compromises that my wife and I made to do the things that we wanted to do.
Yeah.
And it certainly isn't about getting rich. But, I came along at the right time. I mean, I was in southeastern Arizona, nothing but miles and miles and miles of public land. We still had grass then in many areas, and we still had birds. And it was just, I'd start the season, and I'd just, every day, just, another quarter mile up the road, another quarter mile up the road, and you drop them down, and away you go, and you look for birds. And that really, if they're in that environment, if they're able to have that kind of freedom and access to do what they were bred to do, I know it enriched my life.
Oh.
That's why clients came to hunt with me, because not to kill birds.
Yeah.
They came to hunt with me to watch dogs run.
Sure.
That's why they came.
And that's what we do.
Right. And there's just a simplicity to that, and just a real joy to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I know a lot of folks get very structured with bird dog work, and they want to, maneuver a dog or handle a dog.
Sure.
And I know when I was training folks, folks would bring me a dog that something had gone wrong. They needed it fixed. A lot of times what I had to do is just get them to back off a bit, just let nature take its course, let the dog do what it's genetically supposed to do.
Yeah.
It's hard for people to learn that sometimes you just got to let go and watch a thing as opposed to try and maneuver it.
Wild birds will teach a lot, and you had access to a lot of wild birds, and that helps. When I develop a puppy, I teach the puppy to cue off of me. I want to be able to direct it with hand signals. I teach that very young. And after that, I kind of just let things happen for a while. I try to set the puppy up in a situation where he can succeed. And I try to get him around a lot of wild birds. And in this day and age, that's not always easy. Sometimes that means traveling. I drove 2 hours to hunt for 2 hours this morning to get a young dog on birds. And I had 1 bird contact. So, but that's what you do to develop these dogs.
Mm-hmm.
So,
the truth is that dead wild birds make a bird dog.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've heard you say that before, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we were fortunate because, we live up on the side of a mountain range, and I can, from where we live north of Tucson, I can see the Superstition Mountains around Phoenix, so it's just quail habitat as far as the eye can see. When there were wild birds, wow, you could put a dog down and within 200 to 300 yards, you had your first covey.
Wow. And
you push another 200 yards and they bump a second covey. And then you have singles all spread out and you work them for the next 2.5 hours.
Yeah. Wow. And in that environment, you can see the dog very well, right? So it's very visual. And all you had was quail. Did you have different species of quail down there?
We had gambles and scalies near the house, but then there were Mearns quail south of us.
Yeah.
And of course, the early season and late season, we'd have mourning dove, pickup dogs. But my focus, my favorite species to hunt was Gambel's quail.
Was it?
Yeah. And I know that's different for most folks because the perception is that they run and they're difficult to work. And they can be, but it's sort of like ringneck pheasants. Mm-hmm. Okay. Because when Gambel's quail hold, they hold very, very tight. Yeah. So you just need to know how to hunt them. And it's amazing how well a dog learns.
Yeah.
Because some of my dogs were specialists on scalies, but they all knew how to work Gambel's.
Yeah.
And then it takes a particular kind of dog to be really good on Mearns quail. But again, all the differences, and you have genetics, and typically the versatile dogs, like German Shorthair Pointers or German Wirehair Pointers,
Pheasant dogs.
Right. Well, dogs that use more ground scent than air scent.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Trackers. Yeah. And of course, I had a little setter female named Jilly, and a guy was shutting down, and I picked up his kennel, his kennel runs and that sort of stuff. And I got 2 dogs in the deal, and Jilly had been hunted a lot in Mexico on Mearns quail, where rules aren't necessarily followed down in Mexico. But suffice to say that Jilly had seen a lot of Mearns quail.
Yeah.
And she was such a sweet little thing. She would hunt with a German Shorthair female that I had. And the 2 of them were just this perfect pair, because she had slowed down enough that she was working close, but she had the wisdom of an older dog, and she had that particular kind of scenting ability that a setter has. And then we'd pair her with Becky, a German Shorthair, who was good at ground scent and a very solid dog, old German blood, so kind of rigid in the way she approached things. And I'd come in and you'd see them each on point, pointing at each other, and there'd be a covering Mearns quail in the middle. So, and often it was the Shorthair that made the find, and Jilly would just come around on the other side and just lock up, or vice versa.
Right.
So you're right. They learn how to be a team with us, and they learn how to be a team with each other.
Absolutely, they do. Yeah. I don't get to hunt quail a lot, so I'm not the biggest quail guy in the world. I've hunted 3 species. I've hunted valley quail, bobwhite quail, and Gambel's quail. And I've only ever hunted Gambel's quail one time. I'd heard all the stories, but my dogs actually handled them really quite well, probably because they have such a variety of birds that they hunt anyway. I mean, they're very versed in Hungarian partridge and chucker partridge and forest grouse, both duskies and ruffed grouse, as well as pheasants. So they didn't really even seem like it was confusing to them in any way. I mean, their first contact was pretty perfect, and they did really a nice job. And it was good because it was on camera. We were shooting a little television show, so I was really, of course, feeling some anxiety about it, but the dogs handled it really well. Growing up, I lived on the edge of town, and we trained on wild birds, and that was pheasants, right? Well, unfortunately, here in Utah, the urban population has grown, and the city has grown outward, and it's swallowed pretty much everything that I grew up. The existence I knew as a child no longer is. So I have to drive further and further, and my wild birds now that I have best access to are forest grouse. So running a young dog on forest grouse presents some challenges. For instance, you had, quail where you've got this visual. In the forest, we don't have much of a visual. And I've found it's difficult to always know exactly what went wrong or what went right. And so I've had to adjust for that. But still, we do have wild birds here in Utah. It's just the wild birds. My dad's wild bird is not the same as my wild bird. My dad's wild bird was pheasants. My wild bird is chuckers and forest grouse for the most part.
Well, chuckers, I imagine, are a nice bird to work on setters.
Oh yeah, they're very. They're actually. I mean, people say chuckers are the hardest bird to hunt. I think they're worried about the terrain in themselves, but for dogs, I think they're really nice.
Heart attacks is what they're worried about.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the terrain is harsh, but the bird is very gentlemanly. Like, I don't know if that's not the way to say that, but very gentlemanly as far as the dog goes. He behaves pretty well as long as the dogs get above him. Wind coming down the mountain can be an issue because the dog will wind the bird uphill, and chuckers will run for days uphill. They'll run uphill until there's no more uphill and then fly away. And dogs learn how to get above them, even when the wind's blowing the right direction. These old dogs have been around it a lot. They learn to get above those birds, and they'll get them stopped. It's amazing to watch. It's beautiful to watch. You have in the chuckers hills, you have that same visual or a similar visual that you would have in the desert where you can see for days. And that's really, I think, why a lot of guys prefer chucker in this part of the world.
Yeah. And, for our folks out there, hunting's a pretty nebulous kind of talking about a different species of birds and that, but different parts of the world or parts of the country, there's different sorts of bird species that we can run our dogs on. And they're all real good to eat.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. And, my wife and I were in Kauai on one of our trips, and there were chickens everywhere, wild chickens. Yeah. And I was thinking, boy, this wouldn't be a bad place to run a bird dog. So wherever you go, there's always that opportunity.
Yeah.
And it's something the dog needs.
Yeah.
And that's often the hard part. Folks will get a particular breed of dog, and they don't take into account genetically what the dog needs. And some dogs need to run.
Absolutely.
They need exercise.
Yeah.
They need and so if you look at your choice and then you try and figure, okay, how do I do this? What do I do with this dog to get them the exercise they need? Or with herding dogs, sometimes it might be to actually put them in herding training, but whatever you can share with your dog. When you're doing what your dog was born to do, they bond to you.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. And all over the world, as you alluded to. I mean, social media, for all its goods and all its evils, I tend to lean towards the glass is half full thing, and I focus on the positives. And I mean, I have a friend in Japan who has an English setter, and he runs it on what he calls Japanese pheasants. I have friends in Greece that run their dogs on birds, and friends in Norway, and a friend in Iceland. And all these people, they have the same breed of dogs. Now, their dogs look a little bit different than mine because of genetics and, local breeding preference, right? But we all have one thing in common. We love to work with our dogs towards a common goal. And those dogs find birds in Iceland just like they find birds here. And I don't know that if I wasn't a hunter, but maybe I enjoyed hunting, or maybe I enjoyed hiking, or maybe I enjoyed, just getting off trail and seeing some of the world. And I had an English setter. Maybe I would still enjoy running them on birds, even if I wasn't someone that wanted to use a gun. Because as I've gotten older, there is a beauty in watching birds fly away. And I'm sure you've probably discovered this yourself. But, shooting birds is fun, and I really enjoy eating birds, and I love all that. But sometimes it's nice just to sit and watch with your eyes and just watch those birds fly off the mountain. And I think a lot of people miss that.
Yeah. And folks would gain a lot, because a lot of folks do have gun dog breeds or bird dog breeds. Mm-hmm. And they don't really understand that drive, and they think, well, that's something to be muted or controlled.
Right.
And boy, that's a hard ask, because that's exactly what the dog needs.
Yeah.
To make their hearts sing.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. They got a short hair that's out back running lines up and down the fence, wearing a trail, and they're upset because this dog has so much energy. Maybe just taking him out in a place where you can let him go and let him do his thing and see it'll do his heart well. And honestly, it might just relieve some stress for you and teach you a thing or two.
Mm-hmm.
Because that total distraction of, like you said, watching a dog run. I was thinking about that just this morning. I had 2 dogs on the ground. I had my old pro, my old girl. She's 10, and she's out there running, and she's not running big like she used to. And I've got this young, enthusiastic guy that she met the other night in snake training, and they're running together. And when I let the dogs down, I was feeling a little bit stressed out, maybe a little bit, anxious. I've been busy lately. I've got a lot of things going on. And, 30 minutes into watching those dogs run, I had forgotten about all that. And I realized that, not for the first time, but, it is a complete temporary distraction from reality in some ways. And all you think about is just what's going on that hill at the time. And we didn't find a lot of birds, but it was still time well spent.
And if folks know how a dog's nose works, if they can understand those things, then they're taking a walk that they can kind of translate as they're watching their dogs work air and work into things. I know here in Salt Lake City area, there's a lot of folks that there are businesses where people pick up dogs, and it's doggy daycare. Yeah. And they go up the mountain. Yeah. And for 4 hours they're on a trail running those dogs, and it might be a group of 8 dogs, 10 dogs. And there's the logistics. I've trained a lot of those groups where they'll come in and we'll arrange for. And what we do is we have them bring the entire group for the training, because those dogs are an intact pack.
Sure.
And they cue off of each other, and you teach one and everybody else learns. And so they can go up and cut a dog loose or cut a group of dogs loose and be confident that if something bad's going to happen, every one of those dogs is going to key off on the other dog and everybody's going to know to leave it alone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, especially if along the Wasatch Front where there are a lot of rattlesnakes.
Yeah. But in truth, that free-range dog concept of it's all over the world now.
Really?
Yeah. We have the URL for free-range dogs, but I was checking, because we held it for a time before we put this website up. And there's actually a free-range dogs New Zealand, NZ.
Yeah, really?
Okay, yeah. And it's and that's what they do is they run dogs out of Auckland. It looks like folks having a great time, and the beaches look wonderful there, and they're all wild, and those dogs are having a ball.
And so this is just all breeds of dogs that people are doing this to. See, I didn't even realize that this was going on. I mean, I tend to go away from the city rather than towards it. And yeah, I had no idea, but that sounds perfectly reasonable.
Yeah. And from little to big, they mix in and figure out a way to make it work. And that typically young folks doing that.
Sure.
And boy, what a great job.
Yeah.
Who'd want to be a barista somewhere making stuff when you could be on a trail?
Absolutely.
Walking, and dogs zooming back and forth. And,
staying fit. Heck yes.
Yeah.
That's the other part of running an English setter is staying fit. And that's, as we get older, that becomes a little more challenging, but we still work at it.
I hadn't noticed. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, you look like you could run a marathon today.
So. I don't know about that. A very short marathon. And I'd be wobbly when it was over.
Oh, boy, me too.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right. Well, it's a lot of fun thinking about setters. And, we were talking about training, because I was a professional trainer for a lot of years. And I tend to be fairly methodical in the way I look at structured training. And I try and balance it with the genetics of the dog and that. And when I started early on, I was fairly rigid, and like all of us, and I'd read the books and nabbed a training manual, and it's it. Yep. And when we were guiding, we would not breed puppies to sell. We would breed puppies when we needed dogs for the string. And we typically keep about 16 to 18 of our own dogs.
Wow.
And really one of the best training methods was to keep the whole litter and raise them up together and let them learn from each other. And, to go out, turn them loose, and let them develop genetically.
Yeah.
And if dogs live within their own culture, they understand things.
Yeah.
You take a puppy out and you put it in a house and they're reading that manual and it's got to be A, B, C, D, certain timelines and schedule. Very confusing for the dog, and a lot of times it doesn't work well.
Right.
But if you leave dogs to their own devices and you let them run wild, at some point, 10 months old, you start reeling them in. But if you can put that drive and confidence and put them out there where they're learning how to use their nose and learning how to navigate the natural world and avoid brush, in our part of the world would be cactus or whatever.
Yeah.
You have a much happier dog, I think.
Sure. I have a lot of friends that bring up, they're pros, and they bring up field trial dogs, and they bring up, like you said, a whole litter or maybe parts of several litters. They'll keep like 3 dogs that they fancy out of one and, 2 out of another, whatever. And it seems to work really well for them. Unfortunately, us backyard guys, the guys that live in the suburbs and have to make do, we have a little bit different situation. But I have discovered that if you have 2 or 3 really well-behaved model citizens and you put a puppy on the ground with those really well-behaved model citizens, that puppy pretty quickly becomes a model citizen himself. And boy, the hard work I did with 2 dogs really has paid dividends with the last 2 dogs. They taught them to back, backing is genetic, of course, to some degree. But
that older dog comes in and bites them in the nose when they try and steal a point. They learn to back real fast. And for our folks out there that aren't aware of that term, backing means that bird dogs know not to interfere or try and steal a point from another dog. So when they come in and they see a dog on point in front of them, polite manners dictate that they stop and they go on point as well. And wait to see what happens.
Yes, and in bird dog society, that is, it's really rude to steal a point, right? So there are some that do, but
unless you can get away with it,
right. Yeah. So, and my dogs would never nip another dog. In fact, they're nice to a fault, which I wish sometimes that they would. I wish sometimes that they would set the order, but unfortunately, I have to be a pretty strong pack leader. But when it comes to backing and honoring and how they run and how they cue off of me and how they cue off of each other, they are great teachers, much better teachers than I could be. So,
and typically when I was training, we'd have 20-something dogs in the yard, customer dogs and ours. You would typically have a dominant male and a dominant female. Yeah, and they controlled the dog yard. Sure, and they would in training. You could put another younger dog down with them, and manners were adhered to. Yeah, sure. Because what they do is they, come over and just literally put them right on the ground, stand above them, and rough them up a little bit. Certainly nothing to hurt them, but to just say, "Hey, youngster, what the heck you think you're doing here?" Yeah. My dogs are so nice; they would never do that. I've always said, if they got in a fight, they would just lay there and get beat up because they just have no canine aggression at all. In fact, I've seen that happen. My female, she was attacked by a lab, one of the neighbors' lab, and she just laid on the ground and squealed. She didn't fight back or anything. Anyway, but they're not all perfect. So. Well, yeah, and we've had all different. We've had all different breeds of dogs in the yard, and with some of the versatile dogs, German Shorthair, German Wirehairs. They're not the same dog. No. And that's a serious thing. Yes. When they fight, it's a serious thing. Yeah. And I had a gentleman, Martin was his name, and he's from Texas, but he lived in northern New Mexico, Farmington. And Martin has passed. But I would get calls from Martin. And I had trained several dogs over a period of, 15, 20 years. And Martin had I get this call, and Martin says, Webb, he says, I bought me a short hair male. And I said, great, Martin. And he said, yeah, he says, I'm going to have him send it to you. And I said, well, he said, how old is it, Martin? He said, I don't know, maybe 5 months old, 6 months old. Okay. And I said, well, Martin, what do you want me to do? And he says, well, you just raise him up. And when time you put him in training, and when he gets trained out, then you just send him on up to me. Right? So, it was a male shorthair, an old blood male shorthair, grizzled, kind of a roan color, German blood male shorthair. Okay. So you could anticipate a certain genetic pattern with him. They don't tend to run as big. They tend to have better ground nose, good on retrieving, generally pretty good on water, that sort of stuff. But Red was this really kind of dear, rambunctious sort of puppy. When he came in and put him in the yard, and he'd play, and just a hoot. And he hit about 8 months old, and that dominance took over. And so he looks around the dog yard, and he's looking at the hierarchy of the males in the yard. And the one above him was a male tricolor. And setter. It's a male color, yeah. And so he figures, well, I'm going to take a shot at this. And there had been no aggression at all, and all of a sudden I got a problem with him challenging this male dog. And it was the sort of thing where, setters just don't have that. They just don't. They just don't. Yeah. And so, and of course, when Red was that young, he didn't quite understand it yet. He hadn't harness that inner demon in himself, right?
Right.
And so they have a big blow up, and Concha was the dog's name, the male setter, and put him on the ground, hovered over him, and the puppy came out and red, and he just laid on his back, and okay. And it was just as you're describing it, because Concho had his hair messed up, wet hair and a little bit of saliva, and okay, nothing bad. And I thought, well, great, maybe that's the end of it. And it wasn't. He waited 2 or 3 weeks, and he put on a little more muscle, and he gave another shot. And eventually, we're out in the yard, and this Donnybrook opens up, and Red is on top of Concho, and Concho's on top of Red, and they're going spinning, and I'm seeing blood, and I'm trying to stop it. I got a garden hose. I'm trying to get in between them. You know the drill.
I know the drill.
Yeah. So ultimately, Red got his own private quarters, and we had in our dog yard we had what we termed the corner suite, which was a larger area chained. It was a standalone kennel area off of the dog yard. But if we had a male dog that was a problem and needed some private space, that's where they stayed. And so Red got new quarters. And so I reported this to Martin. And Martin says, Webb, he says, that's a problem. He says, because he can't live with me. I'm on the golf course now, and I can't have a dog here on the golf course. So I'm going to have to board him over it, Yeah. And so Martin develops this plan. He calls me, and he tells me he wants me to take Red in and have him neutered. Okay. And I told Martin, I said, Martin, it's been my experience that isn't going to necessarily address his fighting. You might lose a couple ounces, but other than that, he's still going to.
Yep.
Okay. And Martin says, well, he says, I can't do it. So I did what he asked, and I made an appointment and took him in and had the procedure done. And of course it didn't. He was still trying to go up his way up that ladder, And I finished him out. He made a heck of a bird dog. He trained out well, and he went to live in northern New Mexico. And about 3 years later, I get this phone call from Martin. And Martin says, he says, Webb? I said, yeah. He said, I bought me a Pomeranian. And I said, Martin, you've come to your senses. You're going to give up all this bird dog stuff. He goes, oh, no. I says, I still got Red. He says, but the lady where we keep Red let her Pomeranian out of the house and killed him deader than a rock. So I always think of that, setters are such sweet dogs. Yeah. They just don't have it in them, but some of them do.
Yeah. I mean, in Germany, they expect something totally different from a dog than we expect here in America. I mean, English setters, English pointers, of course, pointers now, they are feather aggressive. They don't have most of them don't have any want for attacking anything furry or fuzzy or even rabbits. My dogs, they might chase a rabbit the first time. Of course, I do a little rabbit aversion training, and they never chase rabbits or bother fur again. But in Germany, you might hunt hogs, and then you're hunting deer with your dog, and you maybe get a fox on the way. And then if you see birds on the way back, they're supposed to point and hold. So it's a kind of a little different line of thinking. And that aggression, of course, transfers sometimes over here. And I've been around a lot of German dogs. My father was a breeder of German Shorthairs, and so all my first dogs were Shorthairs, and they had no problem fighting and not getting along. Of course, we didn't know, anything about socialization and all the things, Dad's way of training was you just turn them out and take them hunting, and the ones that do good you keep, and the ones you don't do good. Yeah. But nowadays, of course, one dog, and I've got to keep that dog for his entire life, and I do a lot of work with them now. But anyway, so yeah, it's nice to have. That's the other thing I really like about setters is that they don't have that. Most of them, it's pretty rare to see an aggressive setter. I've heard of some. I'm sure you've probably seen some where you've seen as many as you have, but it's got to be pretty rare.
Yeah, most of the hunting breeds are fairly sociable.
Yeah.
most of them are. And sometimes you'll get dogs just don't like each other.
Yeah.
So they'll live fine within a group. They could be around 10 other dogs.
Sure.
But for some reason, 2 of them just have a problem with each other and they constantly fight.
Yeah.
And those are real problems. Just real problems. Yeah, you can't have a dog that.
No, and especially back then, back when they were developing these breeds. I mean, can you imagine? So you're going out on a horse pulling a wagon, with maybe you're only a few miles from the house or whatever, but you're still it's quite a deal, right? There's not veterinary care close or anything. You get a couple of dogs mixed up and they hurt each other, and maybe even you while you're trying to break them up. That's a big deal. So I'm sure that there was a lot of thought put into breeding the aggression, the canine aggression out of them. I mean, it just makes sense. Yeah. And I think it's is it Laverack's book? What's it called? Is it called The English Setter? Have you read that book? Yeah. I believe he mentions something about that. And
breeding it out.
Something about getting rid of the aggression or something. But
if they had, because the setters came from spaniels, from Spanish spaniels.
Yes.
And spaniels can sometimes have a little bit of
sure.
Yeah. So, I know that folks are pretty safe when they look at the different breeds.
Yeah.
Vizslas, Weimaraners. When you go to pick a puppy, you need to think about those traits. So there's some of the breeds where that's an issue, and you need to be careful about the puppy you buy.
Absolutely.
Right. So you want to see the parents. You want to know the genetic traits of those parents. Is there an aggression trait in there? Some of the German Shorthair Pointers, the old school.
Oh, the drots.
Yeah. And the term was sharp. Mm-hmm. They were sharp.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've read a little bit about them. And of course, I've had some experience with them.
Yeah.
They're a lot of dog.
Yeah.
I don't know that I could with a good conscience recommend one to someone who doesn't, maybe a first-time handler or a young handler that doesn't have some experience, because they can be an awful lot of dog. They can be great dogs in the right hands, but boy, in the wrong hands, they can be disasters.
Right. Well, it's all a huge learning curve.
Oh, for all of us, still learning.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm fortunate. I've spent a lot of time with dogs, and so I've kind of seen that arc. Yeah. Because when I was a kid coming up, all I wanted to do was chase birds and train dogs. And, that's not necessarily a good career plan. But you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was fortunate to come along at the right time, and early on, a gentleman who became my first father-in-law. He was a good old boy from Arkansas, and they ran pointers and German Shorthairs. And I would train with him. And it was very different then because, we didn't have English collars.
Right.
And I remember going out with him, and he had in the back of the pickup truck, which was a beat up old construction, bed hanging on kind of deal. And he had a piece of 6x6 with a piece of chain attached to it that he would clip to the dog's collar, and that was how he controlled range.
Yeah.
And he referred to the click method, and that means you just put the dog down with an older dog, and you just run them till it clicks, And they didn't, there wasn't a lot of thought about woe breaking or introductions or to birds or shot or anything like that. It was a time when there was a lot of available land to run dogs on, and that land was infested with bobwhite quail. Mm-hmm. And they just turned those dogs out until that genetic pattern took over. And you're right, the ones that just weren't going to work,
out of there.
Yeah, they found another place to live, and the ones that did were just jewels. Yeah.
You're talking about my childhood. I remember all those methods. I remember one guy, he had 2 pool balls that he drilled holes in, and he used to hang those pool balls, and they were on cords that were the same length. When the dog had run, they'd clank together, and he claimed that was going to, there was just all kinds of things. I trained all my first dogs without e-collars. And I don't use I use an e-collar, but I don't find myself using it much. I mean, there's a place for them, but I do most of my training without e-collars, and even I use check cords even just only for very limited things. I see a lot of people that are really hooked on technology when they train and use the e-collar as almost like a crutch. I don't think they could train a dog without, and I sometimes feel like, I mean, let's face it, the satellite collars, what do we call them? The GPS collars.
Yeah, GPS, yeah.
Yeah, those things are a gift, right?
Yeah. They change the world.
Oh, they change my world. Yeah. So besides just the peace of mind of knowing where your dog is all the time. So what a GPS collar is you put a collar on the dog, and you have a handheld that you hold with you. And on that handheld, there's a screen that shows you the distance and the direction of the dog all the time. So when the dog goes on point, you don't necessarily have to be seeing the dog. It's sort of the new version of the bell, right? Back in the day in the grouse woods, they used to use a bell. When the bell stopped, you better know where you heard it last. The GPS collar today has changed everything. And I run GPS collars on them, and of course, really let them run. And that's changed the world. But the electronic collar that offers stimulation, it's a good thing. It's a training tool, but I think it's leaned on a little too much.
And you'd be amazed at all the different people now using those GPS collars.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not just about hounds or bird dogs. It's about, people, trail runners or people riding back trails with their dogs. It's a way to be sure that you can find them. And, and maybe it even isn't even you're worried about them running away, but if they get hurt, fall down a hole, they
trap.
Yeah. They
get
end up in a trap. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So your dog didn't turn up. You look at that screen and go, okay, he's 400 yards that way.
Right.
And you can walk into him and find out, what happened.
Oh yeah. I can't imagine life without it now. I was resistant to it at first because Well,
when I was training, that was a big deal.
Yeah.
And back then, you had certain bloodlines. I'd get LU pointers in.
Mm-hmm.
Which way is Texas?
Okay. Heading for the horizon.
That's right. And it was a given.
Yeah.
And the term is self-hunting.
Yeah. It's
a dog that doesn't connect with the gun or the handler. You just put them down and they just run to the sky.
Yeah.
And we had telemetry gear then.
I was going to ask you if you'd used telemetry.
Yeah. So we'd hang because, those are expensive dogs. They don't belong to me.
Yeah. Right.
And that's a hard phone call to make.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. Hey, remember that dog you had?
He's in Mexico.
Yeah. Open your door. He may be there by now. But with telemetry gear, you could, do the dance. Beep, beep, beep. And I had a friend. At any time it took a dog took a flyer on me, I'd call my friend up, and he'd come out and meet me at the training area. And we would spend the rest of the day just walking the flats.
And hopefully he found birds and was standing somewhere so you could catch up with him, I guess. Huh?
Yeah, or he wrapped his check cord around a rock or,
something.
Or what was often the case is we'd come back exhausted and shredded and the dog is sleeping underneath the truck in the shade, well hydrated from the bucket of water we left, looking at you like, where the heck have you been?
Yeah, why didn't you guys come back?
Yeah, I've been waiting here for hours. What's wrong with you?
I found a whole bunch of birds.
Yeah. I miss those days.
I bet you do.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here today. Oh, and I know there's you have come out with a new book.
Yeah, I have.
Tell us about it.
So it's called A Millionaire's Dream. It's about it's fiction, right? When I thought about writing books, I considered writing hunting books. And I have friends that write about hunting, and it's actually, they do a really great job. But I was writing a blog at the time and doing a couple little magazine articles and stuff. And I kind of got tired of writing about my hunting experiences. It seemed a little bit, at least it seemed repetitious, and it was kind of dull to me. So I wanted to do something a little different. So I decided to write fiction, which I admit is pretty ambitious, but it turns out it just kind of I really was natural at it. Anyway, so I wrote this book about this young man who lived in 1950s rural Idaho, and he had it pretty rough. He lived in He was living with his mother, and his mother passes away of cancer, and he had spent most of his life taking care of his sick mother. And so he's socially awkward, and he doesn't have a lot of friends, and there's not a lot of family around. He's really alone in the world, with the exception of some sort of dark influences around him. And he serendipitously meets this English setter puppy. And this English setter puppy connects him to this wealthy gentleman from the city who has an affinity for field trials. And or an affection, I guess I should say, for field trials. And they sort of form this unique partnership. The young man has some things that the wealthy man could never buy, and the wealthy man has some things that the young man can't do without him. Anyway, they form this strange partnership, and they go forward trying to win this huge fictitious field trial called the Western Field Trial Championship. And along the way, there's a lot of bumps and bruises and learning about girls, and there's some pain along the way, and hopefully people find it to be a nice journey. It's been pretty well received on Amazon, so I'm excited for where it goes next.
Well, I'm anxious to read it. You were kind enough to bring a copy by for me.
Well, I hope you enjoy it.
I'm sure I will. Yeah. I want to thank you for being here and talking with us. It was such a pleasure.
Yeah. I want to thank you for helping. You snake broke my dogs. Did some snake aversion training with them, and one of those dogs was a little bit of a challenge. He had been through a snake break course before and failed. But you set him straight, and I appreciate the work you did, because I know it didn't work on him before. But I am confident now that he, on the ground, I feel he means a lot to me. These dogs, they mean the world to us, and so you want to give them every opportunity to be as safe as possible in snake country.
Yeah, and he didn't fail.
No.
The training failed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's important to know. Aversion work is done at a long time. And typically I think because this is an old story, I get
I'm sure
hundreds of dogs in that have been trained before, and almost to a dog, they go right to it.
Right.
There's no connection. They might have a little bit of connection with sound, but nothing with scent. Yeah. If it's properly done, they get it, but you have to do it on their level, and you have to think in terms of the way they perceive the world. And
so this dog, he goes to the snake, and the rug around the snake sort of just doesn't even pay attention to it. Lifts his leg and marks, right?
Yeah, pees on it. He's going to pee on the snake. Yeah.
No respect at all.
Kind of a Rodney Dangerfield move,
exactly.
Isn't it?
Yeah, right.
you might want to maybe give him a nickname there.
Yeah.
Right. But that's very common.
Yeah.
Because there were stress cues on that carpet. And that's what he was adding to.
Sure.
He didn't necessarily know there was a snake there, but there was a lot of dog messages there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you for that, because I don't, I can do most everything myself, but snake training I cannot do, because I cannot, one, have access to a snake.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, with that, I'm going to wish you a great day and safe travels home, and thank you again.
No, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And I hope you continue doing the work you do. Thanks a bunch.
Okay. Take care, folks out there. If you liked this episode, I invite you to visit our website, freerangedogs.com. It's where you can find the stuff you need to live the free-range dog lifestyle. I want to help you with that. Book a consultation call or an in-person training, attend one of our ongoing events, or join our online membership program. We got it all on freerangedogs.com. All right, it's time to head back to the truck and the water bucket for the thirsty dogs. This is Webb Parton signing off, wishing you the boundless joy that comes when you share the outdoors with your best friend.